let me jump over to our HTML editor that we looked at earlier, Dreamweaver by Adobe. And what I'd like to do is we have this sample page here that we'll probably look at later in the term. It's a little more complicated than I'd like to use to start with. If we want to create a new file, remember we go up to the New option on the main drop-down area in Dreamweaver, at the very top of the interface, and choose New, or just choose Apple New or Command New, and it will default to HTML new document, so no problem. All you have to do is just click on the Create button down here. And we are in live view right now. Remember from the video where I talked about how Dreamweaver works, there is a live view, which is a simulation of how our page would look in a browser. And then there is the code view. Now, we're creating a new page that has no content. So obviously, it makes sense that we don't see anything. If we click on code view, you can see that we have a basic skeletal arrangement. We have in the first line our document declaration, which is actually not a part of HTML, but is something that you should always have as the first line of all of your HTML files. This is an indication to the browser that we are using HTML, because sometimes browsers are equipped to deal with other types of code. And it's also telling the browser that we're using the latest HTML5 version of HTML, which is important because otherwise the browser may think that it's inheriting some old HTML page that was created back in 1998, and it might display your page differently and in ways that might not look good. So be sure that you have the document declaration, the angle bracket, exclamation point, doc type, space, HTML, closing bracket. It looks like an element, but it's not. It's outside of the HTML because this is the beginning of the HTML page. And it makes sense that the HTML page starts with the HTML tag, the HTML element. And everything on your page besides the document type should be inside the opening and closing HTML tags. So be sure that you don't stray outside of the opening or closing tags. Also, you can see right after the HTML is the head, and the head opens and then closes. Inside of it, Dreamweaver has created a meta tag and a title tag. Title tags are good because it's always a good idea to title your work and give it some sort of a name. This is something that is not going to show up on your HTML page, but it does show up in the browser at the top of the browser. If most browsers these days are using tabs, so this is what shows up in the tab of the page inside your browser. And that is an important thing to identify your page for your viewers. Also, the title is what search engines like Google use as a list of potential interesting pages that people receive when they search for a particular topic. So you want to have a title that is, a good title that is representative of the page. Usually I use the name of the website along with the name or the short description of the type of page. So if we were inside of Disney.com, I might go Disney.com dash Mickey Mouse, if we went to the Mickey Mouse page inside the Disney.com domain. Now, the meta tag might look a little different, might look a little weird. First of all, you can see that the meta tag does not have a sister tag. There's no closing tag. And this is true for a few tags. Most tags have an opening and a closing. And you can see that I'm already having some confusion about my own terminology. What I'd like to say on a consistent basis is that this is an HTML element when I'm talking about the element in its entirety. And when I'm talking about the opening or the closing tag of the HTML element, then I mean either this particular entity or this particular entity. But over the years, as is true with so many developers and designers, we often call the entire HTML element a tag. So forgive me for slipping into rather poor usage, but I think it does help if I try to call the entire element, the combination of tags, as an element, and then specify the opening tag of the HTML and the closing tag of the HTML. That's going to help you to understand what I'm talking about. Now, the meta element does not have a closing tag, okay? It just has the opening tag. The title element has opening and closing. The HTML, opening and closing. The title, the body. All these guys have opening and closing tags, but not the meta. The method, however, does have something different, right? It has this little green guy here, and that char set stands for character set, and it's telling the browser that we want to use the UTF-8 character set for this page, which is the normal, current modern character set. Facilitates the use of foreign languages and multi-bit languages like Asian and languages like Chinese and Japanese and so forth, among other things. So it is the character set of choice, and you should always probably use char set UTF-8. Anyway, this is how the page starts out, Dreamweaver's nice, and gives us sort of a skeletal beginning so that we don't have to start from scratch with our elements. We can also add some attributes of our own. Nowadays, a lot of times we'll also add to the HTML element an attribute called len, which stands for language. And inside the value area, we put en. The values for all of the attributes should be double quoted. So you can see here, anytime you have an attribute, len stands for language, en stands for English. Again, it's not vital, it's not required, but it's nice to tell the browser that this page is going to be in English. So there are other attributes like that we can add. I'll bring these attributes up occasionally as we talk. So the other thing to remember about the basic structure of these elements is that the head part of your HTML is not for visual content for your viewer. The stuff that goes inside of the opening and closing head tags should be those things that are important to the browser. So the character set is something that the browser needs to know. The title that the browser puts up in the tab is something that the browser needs to know. If you have some outside programming resources like JavaScript and especially cascading style sheets, again, that's something that the browser needs to know about in order to help it fashion the page properly with the right kind of code. So all of the things that are inside the head element, inside the opening and closing head tags, are not things that you want to actually visually show to your patrons, to your viewers. All that action is inside the body. So the body is where it's at. So if we break open the body like that, that's where we want to start adding some of our HTML tags. So if we wanted to add an H1, we could add an H1 here. We could, if we were going to do that contact page, you could say contact us. And we could put in the closing H1 tag. Now, if you're working along with me, you may have noticed that as soon as I did this first part here and added an angle bracket and then a closing / Dreamweaver realized that what I wanted to do was to close the opening HTML tag. And so Dreamweaver wrote out automatically the rest of the closing H1 tag for me. And that's called code completion. And we may have mentioned that in our little video on how Dreamweaver works. But this is a good indication of what we mean by code completion. And it's really nice. It helps us to get through our code quicker. And as you'll probably see as the term goes on, when you watch me type stuff, I'm not a very good typist. So anytime I can get Dreamweaver to do some of the work for me, I am all in on that. So I really like the code completion. So we have an H1. We have content that is appropriate to the element that we've chosen, because this is going to be a page about contact us. And if we know that, we can go back to the title and we can say contact us. We could say, maybe this is Chicago Design Co-op. Something like that. Co-op. Some kind of a organization. And that's the beginning of a page. We have the basic skeletal structure set up correctly. We have our doc type set up correctly. We have our HTML tags. We have our extra little language attribute set up with the double quoted EN for English. We have our head tags set up. We have the title set up properly. We're specifying, this made-up company, Chicago Design Co-op, and this particular page within the website is the Contact Us page. And from the looks of it, we have chosen a very good descriptive phrase to use as our H1. Now we can save this page. It's always a good idea, whatever application you're in, you know that. We want to save the page, so we can go Save As. And we could call it, Contact. We'll call it Contact 1. And actually, I have what's called a site definition open right now in Founding Fathers stuff, but it's okay. I'll save it there anyway. This is just a little test page. But it's really important to save your work, because if your electricity goes off for a second, especially in the summer or the early fall here, when we have some storms, you can lose all of your work, and that's no fun. So save often. And we can also take a look and see what our page looks like. Remember, we said that if we went to live view, we would get a simulation of what our page looks like on the web. So if we click on live, you can see here that we have contact us. So that's the only thing that shows up. We have a lot of code in our page, but visually, remember, the only thing that shows up are the things that are inside the opening and closing body tags. And the only thing that we have in there right now is contact us. So if we were to go down and replicate what we were talking about on our little whiteboard, we could say H2 snail mail. And again, I'm using an H2 here because snail mail is a subdivision of the whole idea of contacting. So I'm going down one level of hierarchy, and then I'm hitting the /, and again, Dreamweaver writes out the closing H2 and closing angle bracket for me, which is so nice of it. Now, let's say we want email. Again, I know that this is a brother element. It's on the same basic hierarchy. Email addresses. Okay. Addresses. I think addresses just has one. I'm also a very poor speller, so you'll find out all my weaknesses here. And phone numbers. And again, you can see how easy it is to close those off. So these three, as we were saying on the board, are of the same basic level. So I'm keeping all of these as H2s. Now, let's say, as we did that on phone numbers, we had a number of local phone numbers and a number of and maybe we had a number of 800. We could call it toll-free, because now 800 is not necessarily, oops, I want to do that. This is part of the content here. Toll-free phone numbers. And I want to put an H3 in there because this is a brother tag to local phone numbers. Like that. You can try to indent when you're going from one level to another. We could grab that down and pull it in like that. It's not really necessary. These aren't really inside each other, so indentation really isn't quite what most people do. But you know, when I'm going from H1s to H2s to H3s, I think it helps to, think of that this is not inside of the H1, but it is, it is a subdivision of the H1. Whereas this H2 and this H2 lined up evenly are brother tags, and the local and toll-free phone numbers, as long as there's maybe more than one, require their own headings, which are a subset of the phone number's H2 heading. So that's how the content that we were talking about on the board looks. We can go to File, Save. We don't necessarily have to save to view what we've done in the live view, but sometimes it's a good idea. So here you see Contact Us, it's snail mail, email, phone numbers, and then local and toll-free. You can also see that besides the general hierarchy, what the browser does is create a visual hierarchy based upon size. So the H1 is bigger. It's the biggest text on the page. The H2 is a little bit smaller, and the H3 is a little bit smaller yet. So again, that is a visual representation of the importance and the subservience or the level of hierarchy of these different types of headings. And that should help a viewer understand more clearly and more intuitively the structure of the content and information on your page, so that they can get right to it. They can see, oh, okay, this is the contact page. Oh, yeah. Okay, if I want to send a letter, if I want to just email you real quick, if I'm desperate and I got to call you up, oh boy, I can use a toll-free phone. Maybe if you guys are just right in Chicago here, I could call you locally. Whatever. It gives people an immediate sense of the type of information that they might need in a given situation. So that is a lot of what's happening with basic HTML. We are trying to convey, by using these elements, the type of information that we have. Now, these are all headings, and within these headings, we might be putting paragraph information of various types. So we could put a paragraph here, and we've got an empty paragraph there. And on a lot of pages, you have a heading, and then you have some explanatory text, a few sentences, and then you have a heading, and you may have some other explanatory text. Something about snail mail addresses and email addresses and phone numbers. Just a sentence or two of explanatory text before you maybe have a list of the actual addresses themselves. So a lot of times you may want to have some of those explanatory things. And what I would do is just copy these things and paste them in. There, and there, and maybe there. So we have explanatory text describing the whole Contact Us page, giving you a little rundown of, what the whole idea of contacting us is about, and then just a little information about how snail mail is used and what we expect, what kind of content we expect to receive via snail mail versus email, and, maybe there's time limits for phone numbers or something like that. So you might want to have any number of different little pieces of extra information in here. A nice thing about Dreamweaver 2 that I didn't mention previously, but that comes in real handy, if we wanted to fill this out with some placeholder text, there's something called Emmet, E-M-E-T, that is built into Dreamweaver, and that allows us to add some fake Latin placeholder text. So in a situation like this, when we're just playing around with a page and we don't really have any particular content in mind, what we can do is just type out the word lorem and then hit the tab key, and bingo, just like magic, we get a couple sentences of what's called lorem ipsum, fake Latin placeholder text. So it's pretty cool. So you can go lorem down here, hit tab, and put your cursor in between the opening and closing tags there, and go lorem, and then hit the tab key, and do this down here, lorem, and hit tab. So that gives you a little better sense of, how the page might fill out. Sometimes you don't necessarily want to have Latin text. Sometimes it's nicer to have English text, even if it doesn't really make sense. There are some applications out there that will fill this in with kind of nonsense English words instead of Latin words. I find that sometimes works a little better because the Latin words sometimes are a little bit longer in terms of the character length than English words. If you look at some of the words here, concitator and appetitzing and laudentium and acousmos and distinctio, reprehenderit. Some of those words are probably not representative of the length of a lot of English words. And sometimes when you look at that, you get a kind of a weird sense of how the paragraphs fill in. When we start to create narrower columns of text, it becomes a little more obvious that those longer words make the columns of text that are narrower look a little funny. But anyway, we can save this, and we can again go to live view, and now you can see that the content is filled in a little bit and looks a little bit more like regular page. We can also, in the live view, go over to the right-hand side, and right in the center here, there is a little bar here that you can use to push in. So you can simulate a web page that is more narrow. This one goes way out to, I think, 1,500 pixels or so, which is pretty wide. So something like around 900 or 1,000 pixels would be more like a representative of the width of the content area of a normal web page. So that's pretty cool. Now, another thing that you can do, because remember when I was talking about the live view and the fact that there is a kind of a disconnect occasionally between what you see in the live view and what you'll see outside of Dreamweaver in a more up-to-date version of a browser. This is a browser, but it's a few versions back. And sometimes a page, at least if it gets a little more complicated, will look different. So one of the things that I do is to go to the tab of the page that we're working on. I talked about this in our little video on Dreamweaver. And right here is Contact 1, is the name of this page. Right-click on that, and you'll get a little drop-down menu. And if you go all the way down, almost, to Open in Browser, and then across, you can open this page outside of Dreamweaver in whatever browser that it shows up in your browser list. And you can add at home all the different browsers that you may have on your computer by clicking on the Edit Browser List button here. You can see I have Safari, Firefox, Opera, and Google. And if I click on Google, you can see that my page now shows up in Chrome outside of Photoshop, outside of Dreamweaver. So it looks the same because it's a very simple page. But you get the idea that this is a perhaps more, I don't know, maybe it's a safer way of looking at your pages, at least later in the term. But you might want to get into the habit of doing that now so that later in the term, when your pages have more complexity, you'll still, sort of be able to think of right-clicking on the tab and opening it up there.